Hello and welcome back to How to Edit with Edius Pro 9 Part 2. Really happy that you're joining us again. Let's open up our project. We left off by fading out to black from our little opening sequence. Let's bring this back down a little bit so that we're not black so long before we start our first piece of media. And I promised you in my last lesson that I'd show you how to create this dissolve. Over the years, a lot of people have emailed me, how do I put a dissolve on my clips? I just want to put a dissolve. And the way that you do that when you first get Edius is actually opening up the effect palette and going through and finding transitions. And we want to go into 2D transitions. Now, when you first run Edius, yours might look more like this. And if you prefer to work with these icons, some people do, then you can just leave it there. If you want to see more of a text-based version of your effects options, just click the little folder there and you'll see them kind of more of a text base. And under the transitions and 2D transitions, you'll see that one of your options there is dissolve. So if we wanted to put a dissolve, for example, between these two clips, what we would do is point to our dissolve effect and with our mouse button held down, drag and drop that over to place it right in between those two clips. And now we have a dissolve between those two clips. And if we want a longer dissolve, we simply have to point to one edge of it and drag that out to have a longer dissolve on either end, if you have enough media at the beginning and end of each of those clips. Now, that can become very tedious if you want to add dissolves that way. For every transition, go over your effects palette and hit a dissolve and go and drag and drop each one. Well, there's some shortcuts. Let's take these off. You can point to any dissolve effect or any effect for that matter, and if it's selected there, you can tell it's selected because it's highlighted. You can just hit the delete key and it's gone. So how do we speed up this process? Let's collapse our timeline here. Let's say we've decided that we want dissolves in between each of these clips. What we could do is, with our mouse button again, highlight all of these areas by kind of a lasso effect. So now they're all selected. Now all we would have to do is drag and drop our dissolve on one of these, and you see that it's going to place it on all of those cuts because we selected all of those pieces of video. So that's a much faster way if you want to add dissolves in between every clip. But there's also another shortcut, and that is to set up a keyboard shortcut for adding your transitions. And you'll notice that as we go over here to our effects bin, we'll see that the dissolve effect right now has a little bluish square right at the top. And what that is telling me is that that is our default transition. If we open this up, right click on it, we'll see that one of your options is to set this as your default effect. If your transition of choice 99% of the time is a nice dissolve, then you'll want to set that as your default transition. I believe the way Edius ships dissolve is the default transition. If you really like the blind wipe, you could go up there and right click on it and set that as your default, and now that becomes the default. And once you have one of these chosen as your default, then it's simply a matter of going over and placing your mouse in between those two pieces of media where you want to place your default transition and hit a keyboard shortcut to place that transition. I've set my keyboard shortcut up to be Control D because I used to edit in Premiere Pro, and that was the keyboard shortcut for dissolves, I believe, or transitions. So when I switched over to Edius, that's how I set up my keyboard shortcut because it was something that I was used to using. And again, if you want to know how to customize your keyboard shortcuts, how to set up a keyboard shortcut for placing these default transitions, I'm going to put a link to a video up here in the corner, should pop up right now, and you can go there and find out how to set that up in your keyboard shortcuts. So that's how you place a dissolve. Now let's go after our next piece of music here. And it's probably this next piece of music. Let's just drag and drop it onto our timeline and see if that's the one I'm looking for. Yeah. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're placing this right. Let's open up our timeline here and maybe just drag it across just a little bit. So we're dissolving out of our black. Okay, so let's go after our first clip here, and I believe it's down here. And for the purposes of our tutorial, I've kind of lined up the first 5 or 6 clips here in their proper order so we don't have to spend time searching for them. Here's our first clip right here. And let's try several different approaches to doing this. Let's use one of the standard favorite methods to start out with, and that is simply double-clicking on the clip from our bin and having it show up in our play monitor or our preview monitor. Some people call it a play monitor, some people call it a preview monitor. That's why I kind of use both terms there, depending on what program you're coming from. Maybe I should give you a little background on this project. It is a refugee settlement in northern Uganda where people from South Sudan have fled the violence there and have settled in this what we call a refugee settlement about 50 kilometers from the border between South Sudan and Uganda. And we call them settlements rather than refugee camps because Uganda has given these people a little plot of land, and they can build their own little hut or house, shall we call it, and have enough room to grow a little garden as well. And so they're not so dependent on handouts. They can grow their own little kitchen garden near their house. And so right now there's close to 800,000 people that have fled the violence in South Sudan and are in Uganda trying to make a go of it in these refugee settlements. And this story, this project, is actually from the perspective of a young girl, I think she's around 12 or 13 years old, who has arrived here at this refugee settlement. She fled her village with her teacher. She didn't know where her parents were, and so she came across with her teacher. And so this story, this project is actually from her perspective of what it's like to be a young girl in a refugee settlement in Uganda. So our first shot here is her going to school. And so we want to get it right to that point. We can take our mouse and point to that slider there and scrub through the shot, looking for where it gets stable there and where she comes out of her little house there. Let's say right about there, and that can be our endpoint. So we want to set an endpoint. You can do that by pointing to your little icon there. Or maybe something I should point out here is that for every little icon that shows up in the Edius interface, it not only allows you to perform that function by clicking on it, it also, if you hover over the area, it'll show you the keyboard shortcut that's currently set to that same operation. So if we didn't want to use our mouse so much, I don't really like mousing around so much. So wherever I can remember a keyboard shortcut, I like to use the keyboard shortcut. So if you find it easier, find your endpoint and then just hit the I key and you've set your endpoint. So let's get it back to where we wanted, where she's just starting to show up there. And I'll hit the I key again and we've set our endpoint. Now we could, if we wanted to, also try and get an out point. You know, we could spend time scrolling to see, well, maybe right about there would be a good place to hit our out point. And we could hit the O key for hitting an out point. But that takes extra time. And if you're trying to put together a project very quickly, I would probably not even worry about setting an out point. Let's clear that out point. And you can do that by hitting the little down arrow if you want to clear an out point. It's Alt-O if you want to remember the keyboard shortcut. So now we don't have any out point, we just have that in point, and we can just drag and drop or use our little icon here if we want to. I find it easier to drag and drop and just place that into place. And I'm not going to worry about the fact that the clip extends on beyond what I'm going to use, because when I drop my next piece of media, I'm just going to drop it right there and it will overwrite the piece of media here that I don't want. Let's see how that works. Here's our next clip. Let's just double click on it to bring it into our preview window. And we see her now walking to school and trying to look for a place that's somewhat stable. You know, I'm kind of walking behind her here, and I'm not using any stabilizing device here, so it's a little bouncy. Let's try maybe bringing right in about there. So hit the I key, I've got my in point, and now I'm just going to drag and drop that and place it right over top of the old media, right at the edit point that I want. So now, without taking the time to do out points on our clip, we're very quickly editing just what we want. So now as I listen to it, I see that this is where I really want the edit, so that it's in time with the music. So I'm just going to drag that piece of media over so that it times up with the music. Now this only works if we're in the overwrite mode. If you try and do this with the little blue button there, you're going to run into all sorts of problems. So if your timeline is not acting the way I'm showing you, it's probably because you haven't set this over to the orange and to the overwrite mode. Okay. We see that there's a little problem with the clip here, and so we might want to find a different portion to cover that area. Let's maybe pull it back a little bit and see how that looks. Yeah, that's not bad there. And then let's go after our next clip. She's met up with some of her friends and she looks back, but let's get it right after she looks back. And try that. Set an in point. You'll see that I kind of go back and forth between using my keyboard shortcut. Whatever my hand is closer to, I guess, is what I do. Then I drag that into place. Well, it doesn't quite go with the music the way I would want there, so let's try and bring this over to the change of music and scrub this across. And that probably doesn't, I don't want that motion there. Let's take a look at it. There's too much camera motion right here. And we get that little problem in the clip there. So let's try and make this our end point and slide it over. And let's drag this back and see if it's stable there. Yeah, that's not too bad. I think probably I will bring this in a little later. Start it maybe about there. You can see I'm using the style of editing where I'm editing most everything right on the timeline itself, rather than using the 3-point style of editing. But just so you get a quick idea of the difference, maybe I'll bring in the next clip the other way. I'm just realizing right now that we forgot to turn on our audio. So all of the clips that we have brought in now have no ambient audio. And that's not what I intended to do. It's just I forgot to turn this audio back on. Let's maybe fix that. If you ever run into the same problem, there's a way you can fix this. Let's turn on our audio track. Let's go back to this clip here, double click on it, and you'll see that it shows up in our preview window, and it shows you our in and out points that were selected. Now what we can do with our audio on, we can hit our in and out points again, and now just drag and drop and replace that section and do the same with the next clip. And now we've got our ambient audio as well. It doesn't look like there's a lot there, but I think I remember there's some sound. Yeah, I'm hearing some birds there. So there is some audio, and it does help. And by turning our audio on here, now I can show you some tricks and tips about using the 3-point style of editing. Let's collapse our timeline here a little bit. Let's find that point for our next piece of music. Right there. Again, we could look at our audio and see where that next clip should come in, right about there. Let's go after our next clip. It's actually Teacher at School. So let's hit that. And this time, to do the 3-point style editing, let's set our in and out point. And at this point, we're not really sure how much of this we want in order to time up with the music. But just for our demonstration purposes of 3-point editing, what you do is you have 2 points here, an in and an out, and then you also have a third point, and that is setting an in point on your record side, on your record monitor. And that actually tells Edius where we want this clip to go. But something else that you can do is determine where you want your audio and video to go. Let's say we wanted the next clip of video to go to video 2, and we wanted the audio to go down to, let's say, the narration track or some other track. Let's maybe go down to 4 that doesn't have any designation yet. Let's say we wanted this ambient audio of the teacher and classroom to go down to audio 4. Well, it's just a matter of dragging this button down to go line up with audio 4 and moving the video designator up to the second track. And now when we hit our orange overwrite button to timeline, it's going to place our video on track 2 and audio track 4 right at the in point that we set. Now, we probably wanted more of that, so let's just slide that across. So that's a quick demonstration of 3-point editing. You get your in and out over here in your preview monitor. You set an in point over on the record monitor, which is actually an in point on your timeline. And then to be even more specific about where you want it, you can also select your video track and your audio track. Now, you can also do something similar using drag and drop method. If I wanted, let's just get rid of this. If I wanted my media now to actually go on track 2, I can still use the drag and drop method. Just drag and drop it to the video track 2 rather than down to the track 1. And then just let your mouse button go and it's now on track 2. So drag and drop still kind of works even if you want it to go to a different video track. Now you notice that when I placed it there and pointed to it, the audio did go down to where we have selected this. If I had wanted that audio to go in our ambient audio track, then I would have wanted to move this back to our ambient audio. Let's get rid of this. And this time when we drag and point to video 2, the audio is going to go directly to the ambient audio track. Now we notice as we play this that the ambient audio is very loud. So we'll want to drop that audio down, and remember, hold down your Alt key, point to the little orange line that's there, and drag that down so it's not so loud. Now, before we wrap up this lesson, let's bring in some of our narration. Let's open up our narration track and maybe let's reduce the size of our ambient audio so we have more room for our narration as we bring it in. Now, whenever I'm working with narration, I usually like to edit that, first of all, in a different sequence, just what I call kind of a scratch sequence. So let's make a new sequence, and we can do that with our icon up here, or if you remember the keyboard shortcut, Shift-Control-N. But click on that, we've created a new sequence. Let's remember right-clicking on it and hitting Sequence Settings allows us to give it a name, so let's just call it Scratch. Now I'm going to change this over to the Overwrite method, and we'll get rid of this video audio track and the title track, just so that we can get them out of our way. And I'm going to bring up my audio, stereo audio up, and hit the down area to open that up and give myself a nice wide window for our narration track. And then we can just drag and drop narration into our scratch bin and take a listen.
I never thought that I would ever be a refugee, but here I am, living in a refugee settlement in Uganda.
Okay, that's the first little clip of audio that I want to bring into our project. So with the audio selected, I'm going to hit the C key, and now I'm going to select the portion of that audio that I want to drop into my project. And so now I'm going to, just like a word processing program where you do a copy paste, hit the Control C key, and because I had that section selected, and you can tell that because it's highlighted there, If we pointed over here, that would be highlighted, but this was highlighted when I hit the Control-C key. Well, we're actually copying this little bit of audio to our clipboard. So now when we go up here and click over to our Project tab, and we find that place where we want to add that narration, let's try it right about there. And we want to paste this into our narration track. So let's go over and select that, and we'll move this slider down. And now when we hit Control V, like you would with a word processing program, it's going to copy that little section of audio right into our narration track.
I never thought that I would ever be a refugee, but here I...
All right, well, first of all, we see our music is too loud. It's overpowering the narration. And so we want to bring our music down. Let's go over to our music track. Let's open up our timeline a little bit. And I think we're going to want to bring this in. We're either going to want to slide this over to the next shot. Let's see how that works. And so let's bring down our music track. Let's click somewhere about here. We don't want the music track to go down too quickly. Otherwise, it's so noticeable. So let's give ourselves a little time for that music to drop down.
I never thought that I would ever be a refugee.
Well, let's try sliding that back a little bit. Maybe pulling back. We can point to any node and just kind of stretch it back. And also take the next node, stretch it back.
I never thought that I would ever be a refugee, but here I am, living in a refugee settlement in Uganda.
All right, so now that we're starting to work with the narration, we might want to adjust some of our video tracks. First of all, we notice that the music is probably going down too low, so let's bring that back up a little bit. And then I think what I want to do is adjust the cut here so that it happens after the end of the narration. And we can do that. Let's try just clicking in between the two clips. You'll see that you'll get a yellow bar there and a green bar. And if both of those show up, you can just put your mouse in between the two. And as you cut into the second clip, the other clip is going to expand out. So let's take a look at that.
Living in a refugee settlement in Uganda.
And might want to just bring it over just a little bit more.
Refugee settlement in Uganda.
Now we're starting to get that problem area of the clip. So let's click anywhere so that you get rid of the green and yellow bars. And now when you go to the edge of that and just select the yellow and scroll back, you're only going to be affecting that clip. And so now we can stretch this out and see if that works.
I never thought that I would ever be a refugee, but here I am, living in a refugee settlement in Uganda.
So that works a lot better. And now that we're getting a feel for the music and the narration and how everything should be timed up, I think we could now start seeing our teacher show up about here. And at any time you want to bring video from one track down to another, it's just a matter of dragging and dropping that down. And if we want to see our audio, our ambient audio track, it's just a matter of sliding this up. Depending on how large your screen is, how much real estate you have to work with, remember you can adjust the height of any one of these to give yourself more room to work with another piece of audio. So now you are getting an idea of the different ways that you can work with video, with music track, with narration. And in our next tutorial, I think what we're going to do is, rather than rebuild this project, is actually go to our edited timeline here and scroll through our project and finding some of those problem areas that we had to work with. How we worked with still images, how we worked with media that was at a different frame rate, and all of those wonderful little problems that you might run up against in any given edit, and we'll go through some of those and show you what you need to do. But for now, I believe that does it for how to edit with Edius Pro and part 2, and we hope to see you back for part 3. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't. Hit the bell so that you get notifications every time we finish up a tutorial. All right, we'll see you down the road.